couple of weeks ago I was reading a book called The Zen Experience, and it's written by a Buddhist scholar named Thomas Hoover. And he said, probably the most misunderstood aspect of Buddhism is the koan. So usually when you first encounter them, maybe in a book, or maybe you encounter them here at the Zen Center. Most people are perplexed by it because it's not your usual style of thing. So you might be interested in sitting, chamsong, or you might be have experienced chanting. We do a lot of that here. You may have experienced bowing, like we bow a lot in our school, and definitely Tibetans do a lot of bowing. You may have encountered a formal meal. We have a long tradition in Buddhism of eating in a very formalistic kind of way, ritual kind of eating style. And you may have read some sutras and read some books, right? But you'll notice when you encounter the koan, that's a really interesting thing about the koan, that none of that seems to help you. And if you reflect on life very much, you'll also notice that many times your thinking doesn't help you. Right? Like in Washington, D.C. now, they're doing a lot of thinking, but it doesn't seem to be helping anybody get over the hump. And it's also that way with life. So Buddhism has a long tradition, like 2,500 years now, of teaching and practicing. And I don't know if you know this, but I was raised a Christian, so one reason I came to Buddhism is because it had practice. So it isn't just rituals. Buddhism has rituals. You can go to, we don't have them much at Zen centers, but if you go to a regular Buddhist temple, like in Korea, if you've ever been there, they're having a lot of ceremonies and stuff all the time. Chase out one kind or another. But you will also encounter practicing. And practicing is kind of a dimension of Christian life which has been lost. Catholics know a little bit about it because you'll go to like weekend retreats where they'll do some kind of maybe contemplative prayer or something like that. But mostly the practice part has been lost. So in Buddhism, definitely the practice part hasn't been lost. So that's what originally attracted me to Buddhism, because during the morning church service at my church, we would have a moment of silent prayer. And I think a moment is an exaggerated word, because it hardly lasted a moment, and then they get on to passing the plate and blah, 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 right? So that's just the way it is. It's a particular kind of style, right? But in Buddhism, there's a very heavy emphasis on practicing. Not everybody does it, but it is at least mentioned and it is recommended. So, for 2,500 years and long before that, human beings have developed techniques for dealing with their problem. And everybody knows, every human being knows this in their guts, just not in their rational thinking mind, that human beings have a problem. Right? We've been killing each other for thousands of years. In the Middle East, perfect example, we have like at least 5,000 years of people fighting with each other. So there's a problem there. Then how to deal with that problem? Well, the Buddha's solution or way of dealing with the suffering that human beings experience was to leave regular life and do something else. So in English we say he left home, right? So when he left home, he was going to try to deal with this problem that human beings have. Generally speaking, we call that in Buddhism suffering. So you can see all kinds of suffering around. around. And you can see all kinds of attempts to get out of this suffering. So some people take drugs, some people buy big houses up here in the hills, some people want to get a new wife or a new husband or a new job, or I'm going to move to the East Coast. Certainly people are there, happy there, because they certainly aren't happy out here. Or if you live out there, they always think people are happy in San Francisco, right? So they're always running around and around and around and around and around. In fact, samsara is around and around and around and around and around. And the reason it's around and around and around and around is because the satisfaction of desires does not cure your suffering, although most people think that, right? So if only we could figure out how to satisfy our desires somehow, then we would be happy. But what the Buddha saw, and you can see too in your own life, the Buddha is not special except in the way he pursued this question, is that actually the satisfaction of your desires doesn't lead to the end of your suffering. It leads to maybe a temporary respite or a temporary lifting of them, but no matter what it is, it's going to change, and then you're going to suffer. So, my teacher, Zen Master Dae Kwang, always said, everybody wants a good situation. Now, two things can happen. You can get the good situation, or you don't get the good situation. If you don't get the good situation, you suffer right away, right? You're disappointed, you're, this turned out bad, right away. Or you get the good situation, and then the good situation, of course you can't keep it, right? Nobody can keep their good situation. You may be young, healthy, strong, I'm going to take over the world, but guess what? You'll end up like Mubarak in Egypt or whoever, right? So that good situation will go away no matter what. So that's what the Buddha saw, and that's what scared the Buddha so much. Scared him so much that he left home. He left his good situation. He lived in the palace. He was a prince. He had pretty good job prospects. Very much, but he left that and to look at this bigger question, right? So Buddhism has developed all these techniques to allow us to look inside of ourselves. So the Buddha left home to find the answer to the great question of life and death. And to do that, he looked inside. So as you all know, he practiced a kind of meditation technique, right? It's right there in the sutras. It tells you exactly what he did. And you can learn this technique in less than 5 seconds. And this technique leads to ultimate final enlightenment. Samyak Sambodhi, right? So what that says is that the technique actually isn't so important because it's so simple. It's like drinking water. It's like falling off a log. It's like breathing, because that was the technique that the Buddha used, right? Very, very simple. This is so simple that you hardly need any intelligence at all. In fact, they've just found out that jellyfish do a kind of breathing, right? So if a jellyfish can do it, we have the ability to do it, right? So, and you're always doing it too, which is another interesting thing. It's just most of the time you're not paying any attention to it. So he added something to breathing, which was paying attention to your breath, right? So his simple technique is breathe in, breathe out, and pay attention to it, okay? So what this allows, it's a technique. It's a technique to allow you to become aware of yourself and see yourself so that you can understand yourself. So the Buddha taught that the way to resolve this great question of life and death, why are we here, why do we suffer, all of this stuff can be answered by using this very, very simple thing. So when Buddha left home, he didn't move to a library. Most of us, right, we go to libraries when we want to find something out. Well, the Berkeley Library isn't big enough, I'm going to the Harvard Library. That isn't big enough, I'm moving to England, where they have a bigger library. And too bad the library burned down in Alexandria in Egypt, because they probably had the answer there, now we don't have the answer. Well, none of that is true, because the answer is right inside. So there's all these techniques. So, thousands and thousands of years of techniques. I don't know if you hang around Native Americans, they do a lot of drumming and dancing and a kind of chanting, right? So these techniques are common to all peoples, every place, all over the world for thousands of years. What that means is there's nothing special about them. So what we say in Zen is that the technique will produce a result, but it's not based on the technique. And it's not even particularly based on being skillful at the technique. It's only based on doing the technique, right? So you get people who are very interested in these techniques. They study all these techniques, and they know every technique. They know every special mantra. They know every special visualization that any Tibetan Karmapa ever did. But what do they ever get? Well, they don't get anything because they don't do it. So the important thing is do it. So around the end of the 600s, the end of the 7th century in China, as near as we can tell, a new technique appeared, and that's the kong-an. Right? So this koan is actually a meditation technique. Right? So that means it's a device to allow you to see yourself. So that's its only job. Its job is to point out to you what you truly are. So it isn't intended to increase your understanding of anything. Right? When you look at koans, they're really stupid. Right? Nobody's going to learn anything from this koan, believe me, in terms of being more intelligent or something, or figuring out, particle mechanics in physics or something. It's just not going to happen because they're all really stupid. Like some ducks fly over, and the monk says, "What was that?" The other monk says, "That was ducks flying over." Then, he gets his nose twisted. So these are actually, when I think about them, they're no-brainers. And the interesting thing about the kong-an as a technique is, the problem isn't that you can't answer it. The problem is you're too smart, you're too clever, and that's why you're not answered, right? So that's kind of interesting. So it isn't based on intelligence, it isn't based on cleverness, it isn't based on understanding Chinese characters, it isn't based on being able to translate Sanskrit into Polish, it isn't based on anything like that. Right? It's based on what you truly are. So what the kong-an is a meditation technique which points at you. It points at what you truly are. That's what it is. So all the techniques are like that. So if you're reading sutras, many people are deceived by sutras. Those sutras are not intended to increase your understanding, although they can be read that way, but that's a mistake. There's no problem reading that way. It's just that in the end, you're not going to find any answers there. In fact, one reason the kong-an appeared was to oppose that reading of them for understanding, right? So you'll notice that many kong-ans deal with conceptual things in sutras, but it's not about that. It's about something else. So the sutras also point at what you truly are. But they, like all dualistic thinking, all conceptual thinking, cannot tell you what it is. And also, the kong-an is a device to show you something that I can't tell you. So this is actually a mistake, what I'm doing here today. I'm talking about something that cannot be talked about. But all religions are like that. They're always talking about something that can't be talked about. The easiest one is God. Well, you can talk about God from now through 5 lifetimes, and you won't know one more thing about God than you knew before you started talking. Very interesting. So all religions are actually just ways of talking about that which cannot be talked about. And talking about kong-ans is the same. It's like talking about bananas or sex or swimming. You can talk about it, but what is it really? In the end, talking isn't that interesting. So the nut behind the kong-an is experience. And as a teacher of kong-ans, they're not for me. They're for you. And that's all. So it's not about me. It's not even about the kong-an. It's about having some kind of experience. So you'll read many times somebody is studying the sutras, and then something will happen to them, you know, where they see that, oh, the sutra isn't helping me. Like the guy in the middle there, Kyung-ho Sini, famous sutra master. So at 25 years old, he's a sutra master at Donghaksa, which is near Daejeon in Korea. And he's famous. He knows them inside out. You can see, like, later in his life, he's a famous poet, so he knows all these Chinese characters. Of course, in those days, they learned Chinese characters rather than Hangul. So he knew it all inside out. But then something happens. Right? And something will happen to you, too. Maybe it's a kong-an, or maybe it's just a situation in life. And you're not going to be able to think your way out of it. Like death is that way. You're never going to think your way out of death. At least nobody has yet. Now you can think that you're going to think your way out of death, but that's just thinking. Right? So people are always, oh, it'll be okay. Oh, you'll go to heaven. Oh, they're in heaven right now, I bet. They went to hell, that's for sure. But you don't know that. That's just somebody's thinking. Either you're thinking or some thinking that somebody else thought, and they wrote it down and you read it in a book. So the radical thing about the koan is that it's not based on anybody else's understanding. It's not even a test, although it does come in the form of a question. So beginning in the late 600s in China with the sixth patriarch, Wei Nong, and then developing up even through today is this technique. Although you'll notice when you actually do this kind of practice, that most of them come from the 8th, 9th, or 10th century in China. And then they were made up. And although we have formal interviews, you know, like our particular style in the quantum school of Zen is more like a Japanese style called Dokusan, where you go in and have a formal encounter with a teacher. But they can be very spontaneous. In fact, all the ones that we actually read about and used arose just in spontaneous situations, you know, like walking over here to eat breakfast or something in the morning, or going to the bank, or walking out in a field or something, right? Definitely the one about the ducks, they were standing in a field, right? So they weren't in an interview room anywhere. So they arose like that, but then they're written down and then they're used. So it's always based on a question, but it's a special kind of question. So most questions that you encounter, and the ones you don't like, are the thinking questions, because you're always judging yourself in terms of thinking questions. You know, do you know the capital of North Dakota or not? So if I ask you, what's the capital of North Dakota, does anybody know? Correct. Good. And then all the rest of you were stupid.
I knew too.
Well, I know the capital. I know the capital of North Dakota. A lot of people think it's Fargo because of the movie. So, everybody judges themselves because they went to school, and their parents think that you're smart or you're stupid. You know, particularly like Koreans. Koreans have this thing where your parents are always looking over you and how your life is progressing. But American parents do the same thing. This is just a different style. So when they encounter the koan, many times you have this psychological baggage that you carry with you, that you encounter the koan as if it's a thinking question, and it's not a thinking question. It's a before thinking question, which is very interesting. So there's two kinds of questions, generally speaking, in the world. There's thinking questions, what's the capital of North Dakota? And then there's before thinking questions. So these are questions that you can't look up the answer in a book. Like, where do you go when you die? Well, you can look that up in a book, and there have been books written about it, right? Hospice books, religious books. So where do Hindus think you go when you die, Stuart?
Next lifetime.
Yeah, right. So they have some kind of theory of reincarnation. Right? And if you're a Christian, where do you go when you die? You either go up or you go down. Right? That's the theory, although it's pretty vague if you actually read the Bible, because Jews didn't have a notion of heaven and hell. Vaguely, but not a place that you actually went. So that was invented by some Christians, just recently. In the last 2,000 years. And the end of the world? Oh, that's a Jewish idea that appeared around 600 BC. Before that, there was no idea. So all this 2012 stuff, that's a relatively recent idea. And it's projected on the Mayan Indians who had a cyclical notion of time. Very interesting. So these ideas float around all over the place, and guess what? They're not going to help you. So the koan is very interesting because the koan is designed to give you an experience. I always say it's intended to evoke an experience. And it's intended to evoke an experience of your true self. So one thing that's very famous about the sixth patriarch, Wei Nong, he's the founder of modern Zen. Because before that, we just don't know that much about what was going on with respect to Zen. But with Sixth Patriarch, it's very clear to see because there's a platform sutra, and whether he wrote it or not, you can definitely see what they're saying and how they talk about it. So a lot of the very first koan-ans appear in the platform sutra, and you can read them and see how it works because he has dialogues with monks, right? And they're koan-like dialogues. So usually the koan involves a dialogue. So it'll be a question-answer kind of situation. So it presents you with a question, and the question is designed to evoke a direct experience of your true self. And that's it. Interesting, huh? So that's the koan. Then there's many styles of using these koan-ans. Like some schools of Zen don't use koan-ans, like modern Soto Zao, in Chinese is Zao Tong Soto style. They don't like koan-ans. And then there's the Lin Chi style, they love koan-ans. And then there's the Korean style, which comes before the split between the Zao Tong style and the Lin Chi style. Then they have a particular style of koan practicing too. Although it also has kind of faded away. Like in Korea now, they mostly practice what's called Wadu style. But before that, and even alive today, is a style called Walgu, which means live word. So in my lineage here, Kyung-ho Sanim, Manggong Sanim, Kobang Sanim, and then Sungsang Sanim, they're in this tradition of, which is called live word. So our style is to teach dono and just do it. And then don't attach to the koan. Right? So we don't use the koan as an object of contemplation while you're practicing. Right? Some schools do, like the Lin Chi school. And also, this koan can be one of these wadus. That's a word that you hold in your mind practicing. But that's a little different than our style. Our style is Walgu, which is live word style. So what that involves is many koan. So you'll notice when you come in for an interview, you'll get 3 or 4 koans just fired at you like a gun. And the reason that's done is because hopefully it goes by so fast that you don't have a chance to think. Right? Because as soon as you go into thinking, you're done for. My teacher was always saying, if you ask a koan, the person says, then he'll always say, thinking won't help you. Right? So it's always like this. And that's this just do it style. So it's not based on, it's this, or maybe it's that, or I should go read that book, or blah, 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 like that. It isn't like that. It's intended to evoke your intuitive self. And your intuitive self doesn't operate in any kind of linear way, like linear thinking. And it doesn't operate in terms of dualistic thinking. In fact, your intuitive self transcends one of the most basic ideas, misconceptions, that we have about reality, and that is subject-object. So we say, oh, that was so subjective, because this over here is objective. So we're always doing that. It's me, I, my, me, and then all of you and it and all the other stuff, right? Basic kind of dualism. So the sixth patriarch is always saying you have to explode this dualistic thinking, these dualisms. So we're always thinking in terms of dualisms. Win and lose. Good and bad. Moral and immoral. Correct? Not correct. Up, down, in, out, subject, object, and the most basic one that everybody has living in their guts, life and death, right? So you're always thinking in terms of these dualistic ideas. So the koan is kind of like an atom smasher, except it's not designed to smash atoms. It's designed to smash any kind of dualistic idea you have about the way things really are. But there I've had to use a dualistic idea, the way things really are and the way they really aren't. So that's why my whole talk is a mistake. Because I'm not talking, I can only talk about something that can't be talked about. I'm sorry. But actually that's going on all the time. It's most obvious when you talk about a banana. Did you ever talk to somebody about a banana? Probably not. But if you could go to talk to an Eskimo about 400 years ago and explain to them, like take your PowerPoint presentation with you and you pull down the screen and you start flipping through the slides, like bananas are kind of like yellow, look at that, it's kind of curved, kind of looks like a hot dog. So you can talk like that for hours and hours on end, and then you can have them memorize facts about banana production in Nicaragua or something. And then you can, it kind of tastes like this, and it kind of tastes like that, it kind of smells like this, and it kind of smells like that. It feels like this, and it kind of feels like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't help. But you can do one very simple thing. You can hand them a banana and oh yeah, I get it. And then the first time they see a banana tree, whoa, wait a minute. And the first time they see a flower on a banana tree, whoa. I can remember the first time I ever saw a banana tree, I was so surprised because I always thought the bananas hung down. They don't hang down, they hang up. I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Where did I get that idea? Because when you see them in the store, you naturally, because of gravity, you naturally think that things go down. But they don't always go down, bananas grow up. So that's, everything in life is actually like that. So what the koan does is point you about the way things really are by using these clever questions that are not about thinking, they're about your experience. So if you can let go of all the stuff about not liking to be asked questions that you don't know the answer to, which is a given when it comes to kong-ans, believe me. Because, some of us here have had hundreds of koan encounters. I've had thousands of koan encounters. I spent many, many years being beat over the head by Zen Masters. Literally beat over the head. So the most important thing is, just like any meditation technique, is doing it. Not whether you're good at it or bad at it, whether you're successful or not successful. And here's the secret. I'm going to tell you the secret of kong-ans. Although this is a very interesting secret, because you can tell this secret to anybody. The koan is not dependent on good answer or bad answer. because that's just the opposite of what you think about questions. Because you think questions have good answers and bad answers, right? So if you solve a quadratic equation, the teacher will look at it and say, down here at the bottom, you go through these steps, and then at the bottom you'll get a result, like x equals 3.2 or something. Then they'll say, oh, good answer. And if it says 3.7, they'll say, oh, bad answer. That isn't true of kong-ans. There's no good answer, and there's no bad answer. And there's another thing. Answer appears, answer doesn't appear is the same. So that's why they're a special question. Because what they are pointing out to you is how do you keep your mind moment to moment to moment to moment. So what you want to do is keep a don't-know mind, moment to moment to moment in your life, because the koan is only about this moment. It's not about the past. Oh, I already answered that koan. That's thinking about the past. Then the other thing you think is, I can't answer the koan. That's about the present. But the present already went by, right? Doesn't exist anymore. And then the other thing you think is, I will never answer this koan, right? Anybody ever heard that? So that's thinking about the future. But the koan isn't about the future, and it isn't about the past, and it isn't even about just now. It's about boom. So that's the koan as a technique. So now you know way too much about koans, but it's not going to help you. So I don't mind telling you this stuff.